$1.5 million. That was the exact figure the man sitting across from me demanded before our appetizers even arrived at the table. He did not ask. He demanded. He leaned back in the leather chair of the Westchester Country Club, adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, and smiled as if he were doing me a favor. Underneath the heavy oak table, my daughter Rachel, a brilliant pediatric surgeon who usually commanded operating rooms with absolute authority, was trembling. I felt her cold hand press a crumpled paper napkin into my palm. I kept my face perfectly still. I subtly unfolded the napkin under the table. Scrawled in shaky handwriting were 6 words that made my blood run cold. Dad, he is a con artist. Help. I looked at the man. I looked at my terrified daughter. I smiled warmly, raised my glass of sparkling water, and said exactly 2 words. I agree. If you are listening to this, and you have ever had to smile in the face of a monster to protect your child, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from today, because the story I am about to tell you is going to test everything you believe about deception and the lengths a father will go to when his blood is threatened. The afternoon sun was pouring through the massive windows of the country club dining room. It was a beautiful Saturday afternoon, the kind of day where wealthy men discuss golf handicaps and stock portfolios over expensive wine. But my mind was entirely focused on Preston Harrington. That was the name he had given me when Rachel introduced him 3 months ago. Today was supposed to be a celebratory lunch to discuss their upcoming wedding. Instead, it felt like a hostage negotiation. Preston took a sip of his wine and set the glass down with a deliberate, slow motion. He looked at me with eyes that were entirely too calm. He explained that a modern wedding for a family of our stature required a certain level of sophistication. But he did not stop there. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, and suggested that we bypass the traditional wedding gifts. Instead, he wanted me to wire $1.5 million directly into a joint investment portfolio he had already set up for them. He called it a lifestyle and legacy fund. He used words like tax optimization and generational wealth management. I have spent my entire life in the logistics and warehousing business. I started with one broken-down delivery truck and built a supply chain empire across the East Coast. I have negotiated with ruthless union bosses and cutthroat corporate raiders. I know the scent of greed. Preston was drenched in it. He was too smooth. His pitch was too rehearsed. The heavy gold watch on his wrist was an expensive timepiece, but the way he kept making sure it peeked out from his sleeve told me he wanted me to see it. Men with real, quiet wealth do not need to show it off. But the real alarm bells were not coming from Preston. They were coming from Rachel, my beautiful, fiercely independent daughter. Since my wife Martha passed away 10 years ago, Rachel has been my entire world. She had always been strong. But sitting next to Preston, she looked like a shadow of herself. Her shoulders were hunched. Her eyes darted nervously toward him every time she spoke, as if asking for permission. When he made his outrageous demand for the money, she did not look at me. She stared down at her untouched salad, her breathing shallow and uneven. That was when I felt her hand brush against my knee. The transfer of the crumpled napkin was desperate. The words written on it were a plea for her life. Dad, he is a con artist. Help. My initial instinct, the instinct of a father who has spent his life protecting his family, was to reach across the table, grab Preston by his expensive silk tie, and drag him out into the parking lot. I wanted to break his jaw. I wanted to call my security team and have him thrown off the property. But the cold, rational part of my brain, the part that had kept my company alive through 3 economic recessions, screamed at me to stop. If Preston was a con artist bold enough to demand over $1 million to my face, he was not acting alone. And more importantly, if Rachel knew he was a criminal, why was she sitting here playing the role of the loving fiancé? Why did she have to pass me a secret note in a public restaurant? The answer was terrifyingly simple. He had something on her. He had leverage. an invisible gun pointed straight at her head. If I confronted him now, if I blew his cover, whatever trap he had set for my daughter would snap shut. I had to disarm him with the one thing he did not expect: total compliance. I took a slow, deep breath. I folded the napkin and slipped it into my jacket pocket. I let a warm, grandfatherly smile spread across my face. I looked Preston directly in his cold, calculating eyes. "I agree," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of suspicion. "I think a legacy fund is a brilliant idea, Preston. You are a smart man. Rachel is lucky to have someone who thinks so far ahead about her financial security." The reaction was instantaneous. Preston blinked, clearly caught off guard by how easy it was. A flash of pure, unadulterated triumph crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a humble nod. But it was Rachel's reaction that shattered my heart. The moment the words left my mouth, her entire demeanor flipped. The trembling stopped. She threw her arms around Preston's neck and kissed his cheek enthusiastically. She looked at me with wide, bright eyes and a smile that did not reach her soul. "Oh, Dad, thank you. Thank you so much," she said, her voice an octave higher than normal. "See, Preston, I told you my father would understand. He always wants the best for us." She squeezed his shoulder, playing the part of the overjoyed, naive heiress perfectly. But over Preston's shoulder, for one fraction of a second, her eyes met mine. They were drowning in pure terror. I raised my glass and offered a toast to the happy couple. I drank my water, letting the cold liquid wash down the absolute fury burning in my throat. Preston thought he had just won the lottery. He thought he had successfully intimidated a tired old man and cornered a wealthy heiress. He had no idea that he had just declared war on a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. I did not know what kind of leverage he held over Rachel, but I was going to find out. And when I did, I was not just going to stop his wedding. I was going to dismantle his entire life piece by piece. The game had just begun. The waiter finally arrived, carrying a silver tray with our appetizers, completely oblivious to the silent war that had just been declared at table 4. Preston did not even look at the food. His eyes were locked on me, gleaming with a sudden, sharp hunger. He leaned back, steepled his fingers, and let out a soft chuckle. "It is wonderful that we are on the same page, Harrison," he said, dropping the formal tone he had used when he first sat down. "But in the world of high finance, verbal agreements are just air. The market moves incredibly fast. I need to secure the initial investments for the lifestyle fund by Monday morning. A show of good faith would make the transition much smoother for everyone." He was pushing. A smart con man would have taken the win and waited, but Preston was arrogant. He thought he had completely broken me. He thought the sight of my terrified daughter had turned me into a compliant machine. Underneath the table, I felt Rachel stiffen again. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew he was tightening the leash around her neck. I did not argue. I did not ask for a few days to move funds. I simply reached into the breast pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out my leather checkbook. I laid it flat on the pristine white tablecloth. I uncapped my fountain pen. The gold nib caught the afternoon sunlight as I smoothed the crisp paper. "How much of a good faith deposit do you need to secure the accounts, Preston?" I asked, my voice completely calm and entirely accommodating. He did not hesitate for even a second. $100,000 should be enough to open the primary holding accounts and bypass the standard waiting periods, he said smoothly. I nodded slowly, as if this was a perfectly reasonable request to make over a crab cake appetizer. I began to write. I wrote the date. I wrote out his name, Preston Harrington, with deliberate, elegant strokes. And then I wrote the numbers. 100000. I signed my name at the bottom. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise at the table. When I finished, I tore the check from the ledger. I held it out to him. For a fraction of a second, his carefully constructed mask of a sophisticated hedge fund manager completely vanished. His hand darted out and snatched the paper from my fingers, with the absolute speed of a starving animal. His eyes widened as they locked onto the dark ink. His pupils dilated. His breathing hitched slightly in his throat. In that fleeting moment, I did not see a financial genius. I saw a cheap, desperate street hustler who had just scored the biggest hit of his miserable life. The raw, ugly greed radiating from him was palpable. He quickly cleared his throat and slipped the check into his designer jacket, forcing his features back into that smug, relaxed expression. "This is an excellent first step, Harrison," he said, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "You know, I have been looking at the Caldwell Logistics portfolio. It is impressive what you built. Starting from a single rusted delivery truck in the 1970s to a massive East Coast empire. The warehouses, the freight lines, the maritime contracts. You have done well for a guy who built everything with his bare hands. But let us be completely honest here. The supply chain industry is changing rapidly. It requires modern financial structuring, advanced algorithms, offshore tax sheltering. You've been running a billion-dollar empire like a corner grocery store." I sat there and let him insult my entire life work. I let him talk down to me about the company I had bled for. I built Caldwell Logistics by driving through blizzards, sleeping in freezing loading docks, and outsmarting corporate sharks who had shiny degrees from Ivy League schools. I knew every route, every union boss, and every inch of asphalt from Boston to Miami. And here was a soft man who had never lifted anything heavier than a crystal champagne flute, telling me my legacy was severely outdated. "I will make sure the Caldwell name is properly monetized," Preston continued, raising his glass again. "Rachel and I will bring this family into the 21st century. You just focus on enjoying your retirement, old man. Leave the heavy lifting to me." I smiled warmly. "I appreciate that, Preston. It is a very heavy burden. I am glad Rachel has found someone so capable to take the reins." Rachel forced a small, strained laugh. "Yes, Dad. Preston is so smart with money. You do not have to worry about anything anymore." I reached across the table and patted her hand. It was ice cold. "I will not worry, sweetheart. Not anymore." I stood up from the table, claiming that my doctor had advised me not to sit for too long. Preston did not bother to stand. He simply gave me a lazy salute with his wine glass. Rachel stood up and hugged me tightly. She held on for a second too long, her face buried deeply in my shoulder. "Stay strong," I whispered so quietly that only she could hear. Then I let her go, turned, and walked out of the elegant dining room. I kept my posture stooped, playing the role of the defeated aging father through the lobby and out the glass doors. The valet brought my car. I climbed into the seat, closed the door, and the illusion dropped. I gripped the steering wheel tight. I merged onto the highway. I pressed the dashboard button to dial my lawyer. "Michael," I said. The voice answered sharply. "Harrison, how was lunch?" "He took the bait," I replied. "I just handed him the check. Monitor that tracking number. He has no idea what kind of dangerous war he has just started today." I drove in silence for a long time. The hum of the engine was the only sound in the quiet cabin of my car. I did not go straight home. Instead, I drove out to the old industrial district near the southern harbor. I parked my car facing the water, watching the massive cargo ships slowly navigate the deep channel. These waters were where I built my entire life. I knew every current, every pier, and every rusted shipping container on those docks. I understood exactly how heavy things moved across the world, and I understood when things were being deliberately hidden. I sat there watching the gray waves crash against the concrete barrier, waiting for my phone to ring. I knew Michael would not take very long. Michael Rosenthal was not just an ordinary lawyer. He was a brilliant financial architect. He managed the wealth I had accumulated over 40 grueling years, and he retained a team of forensic accountants who could track a single dollar bill across the entire globe. 2 long hours passed. The sun began to dip much lower, casting long, dark shadows all across the cold harbor. Finally, the secure phone vibrated against the leather center console. I answered it immediately without hesitation. "We have a massive problem, Harrison," Michael said. His voice was unusually tight and strained. There was no polite greeting. Michael was a man who never panicked under pressure, but right now he sounded genuinely rattled by what he had found. "Tell me exactly what happened to the check," I replied, keeping my voice low and perfectly steady in the empty car. "I tracked the specialized routing number you embedded." Michael explained, his words coming out fast. "The moment he deposited that check, the funds hit a primary holding account, just like we expected, but they did not stay there for even a single minute. The entire $100,000 was instantly fragmented. An automated digital algorithm split the money into hundreds of untraceable microtransactions. Within 30 seconds, those fragmented funds were converted into 3 different anonymous cryptocurrencies." I gripped the leather steering wheel tighter. "Go on," I said calmly. "From there, it gets much worse," Michael continued, the sound of a keyboard clacking loudly echoing in the background. "The crypto was pushed through a series of automated digital tumbling services to completely wash the transaction history. Then it was rapidly converted back into standard fiat currency and routed directly through 4 different anonymous shell banks located securely in the Cayman Islands. The entire complicated process, from the exact moment the bank teller scanned your paper check to the moment the money vanished completely offshore, took exactly 1 hour and 47 minutes. Harrison. This is absolutely not a wedding fund. This is institutional-grade money laundering at the highest possible level." I closed my eyes tightly. The cold, hard reality of the terrifying situation washed over me completely. I had expected Preston to be greedy. I had expected him to funnel the money into a private personal account to buy expensive sports cars or pay off hidden gambling debts. I certainly did not expect him to have direct access to a sophisticated dark web financial infrastructure that could easily outsmart federal banking regulators. Before I could even respond to Michael, my personal cell phone chimed brightly with an incoming text message. I pulled the device away from my ear and looked closely at the glowing screen. It was from Preston. "Hold on a second, Michael," I quietly said. I opened the unread message. It was a high-resolution photographic screenshot. It looked exactly like a secure dashboard from an exclusive private wealth management portal. It featured a sleek, modern interface, official-looking corporate watermarks, and a detailed, colorful chart showing a highly diversified investment portfolio. At the top, printed in elegant professional typography, it proudly read, "Harrington and Caldwell Legacy Trust." Below that bold heading, it showed an initial verified deposit of exactly $100,000 supposedly already allocated into safe blue-chip stocks and secure municipal bonds. Beneath the polished image, Preston had typed a short, arrogant message. "Just wanted to give you complete peace of mind, Harrison. The initial requested funds have been safely secured and strategically allocated for maximum long-term tax efficiency. Rachel and I are so incredibly grateful for your generous guidance. Have a truly wonderful evening." I just stared blindly at the digital screen. The sheer brazen audacity of the massive lie was absolutely breathtaking. If I had not deliberately planted that hidden tracking number on the check, I would have easily looked at this fabricated screenshot and genuinely believed my money was sitting completely safely in a legitimate corporate brokerage account. The fake financial portal was absolutely flawless. It was perfectly designed to completely pacify any wealthy, unsuspecting target. It was the ultimate plausible lie. I put the phone back to my ear. "He just sent me a screenshot of a fake investment portfolio," I told Michael. "It looks incredibly real." Michael let out a very heavy sigh. "That confirms everything, Harrison. You are absolutely not dealing with a lone gold digger trying to marry into family money. Building a fake financial portal, utilizing automated crypto tumblers, and maintaining offshore shell accounts requires a massive organized team." He has professional developers, shady accountants, and ruthless fixers. Preston is merely a frontman. He is the charming face of a highly organized professional criminal syndicate. They specifically target high-net-worth families, isolate the vulnerable members, and bleed them entirely dry. "And they have my daughter," I whispered, the raw anger finally cracking through my composed facade. "I cannot call the police, Michael," I stated firmly. "If I bring in federal agents, Preston will panic and instantly execute whatever terrifying leverage he holds over Rachel. I need someone who knows exactly how these dangerous syndicates operate from the inside out. Someone who can operate completely in the shadows. I am calling Victor Thorne." Victor Thorne was a man who lived comfortably in the shadows. Before he became the most expensive private investigator in Boston, he spent 20 years hunting ghosts for the federal government. I did not meet him at his office. I parked 3 blocks away to ensure I was not being followed. We met at a rundown diner on the outskirts of the city, a place where nobody paid attention to an old man drinking bitter black coffee and a man in a faded gray trench coat. Victor slid into the booth across from me and placed a thick, unmarked manila folder on the sticky formica table. He did not ask how my day was going. He just tapped the folder with his index finger. "You asked me to look into a man named Preston Harrington." Victor said, his voice a low rumble. I ran his social security number, pulled his tax records, his university transcripts, and his corporate registrations. I even checked his dental records. Victor paused and took a slow sip of the terrible diner coffee. "Preston Harrington does not exist. Harrison, the man sitting at the country club with your daughter, is a completely fabricated phantom. The social security number belongs to an infant who died in 1982. The degree from Princeton is a digital forgery inserted into their database by a skilled hacker. Even the hedge fund he claims to manage is just a registered domain hosted on a server in Eastern Europe." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. "Then who exactly is sleeping in my daughter's house?" I asked softly. Victor opened the folder and slid a grainy surveillance photograph across the table. It was Preston, but he was not wearing a tailored suit. He was wearing a cheap leather jacket outside a casino in Macau, looking younger and infinitely more dangerous. "His real name is Damien Russo," Victor explained. "He is not a financial genius. He is a career predator. He is a high-ranking lieutenant in an international romance scam syndicate. They do not target lonely widows for a few $1,000s. They hunt wealthy heiresses. They infiltrate their lives, isolate them from their families, and drain their trust funds until nothing is left." I stared at the photograph. "How does a street hustler build a fake financial portal that can fool a seasoned lawyer?" I asked. Victor leaned forward. "Because Damien is not acting alone, Harrison. He is the charming face of the operation, but he has a team backing him up. The digital footprint of that fake dashboard traces back to mercenary hackers who specialize in corporate espionage. But it gets worse. Damien travels with a protection detail. I tracked his movements over the last 3 months. 2 men follow him everywhere. They do not look like bodyguards. They look like enforcers. Men who break legs and make people disappear. This syndicate is ruthless. When they lock onto a target, they do not let go until the accounts are empty. If the target tries to go to the authorities, they use blackmail, physical intimidation, or worse." The diner suddenly felt suffocating. My immediate impulse was to call the police chief and have Damien arrested for fraud. I wanted to send my security personnel to Rachel's house and drag her out immediately. But I remembered the terrified look in Rachel's eyes. I remembered the crumpled napkin. She knew he was a con artist, yet she was actively protecting him from my suspicion. "We cannot involve law enforcement," I said firmly. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Harrison, this man is a dangerous criminal. If we take this to the feds, they can raid his location before midnight." "And what happens to Rachel the moment the police kick the door down?" I countered. "Damien has something on her, Victor. She is a brilliant surgeon, completely independent. But she sat there today acting like a terrified hostage. She passed me a note begging for help, then praised his financial skills. He has an invisible gun pointed directly at her head. If we spook him, if he suspects we know his real identity, he will pull the trigger. He will release whatever leverage he holds over her, or his enforcers will hurt her, before the police can draw their weapons. Victor slowly closed the manila folder, sliding it back across the sticky table. So what is the play here, Harrison? You just gave a master criminal $100,000 of untraceable seed money. You cannot just sit back and let him marry her in peace. I am not sitting back, I said, a cold, calculated anger replacing the initial shock. I am going to destroy him. But I cannot fight a war if I do not know what battlefield I am standing on. I need to know exactly what he is using to control my daughter. I need to see what happens when the doors are closed, the lights go down, and the loving fiancé mask comes off. I looked directly into Victor's eyes, feeling the heavy burden of my decision. I want you to bypass the advanced security and alarm system at Rachel's house. I want hidden cameras and audio recording devices planted secretly in every single room. The living room, the kitchen, the home office. Absolutely everywhere. Victor nodded slowly, fully understanding the extreme gravity of the request. You understand this is a massive violation of her privacy, Harrison. If she finds out you bugged her home, she might never speak to you again. I would rather have a daughter who hates me forever than a daughter who is dead, I replied, without a single ounce of hesitation. Do whatever it takes, Victor. Spare absolutely no expense. Use your very best people. I want eyes inside that house by tomorrow night. Damien Russo thinks he has outsmarted a tired old man. He is about to learn what happens when you threaten the only thing I have left in this world. By late Tuesday evening, Victor's technical team had bypassed the sophisticated security systems at Rachel's estate. They operated like ghosts while she was working at the hospital. I was sitting in the dimly lit basement of my home, staring at high-definition monitors. Every room in her house was displayed in crystal-clear night vision. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of cooling fans on the encrypted servers. I sat quietly in my armchair, waiting for the monsters to come home. At exactly 11:15, the front door swung open on monitor 4. Rachel walked in first. Even through the black and white lens of the hidden camera, I could see the absolute exhaustion radiating from her posture. She dropped her keys on the console table and rubbed her temples. Damien followed right behind her, locking the heavy deadbolt. The charming, sophisticated hedge fund manager I had met at the country club vanished the second that lock clicked into place. His posture shifted. His face hardened into a cold, predatory sneer. He took off his expensive jacket and threw it carelessly onto the pristine white sofa. Rachel did not even look at him. She walked straight toward the kitchen to get a glass of water. Damien followed her, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I leaned closer to the monitor, my heart pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs. I reached out and turned the volume dial up on the audio receiver. You were sloppy today, Damien said. His voice was no longer smooth. It was a vicious, grating whisper. Rachel froze with her hand hovering over the faucet. I did exactly what you told me to do, she replied, her voice trembling slightly. I smiled. I hugged you. I made him think everything was perfect. Damien stepped into her personal space, backing her hard against the marble kitchen counter. He raised a hand, and for a terrifying second I thought he was going to strike her. I gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned completely white. Instead, he slammed his palm flat against the counter, inches from her waist, trapping her. You hesitated when he wrote the check, Damien hissed. I saw it. He saw it. If you ever look at him like a scared little rabbit again, I will not wait until the wedding. I will ruin you right now. Do you understand me? Rachel shrank away from him, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. Please, Preston. Just take the money and go. He gave you $100,000. Is that not enough? Just leave us alone. Damien let out a dark, cruel laugh. It echoed through the kitchen and straight into my basement. $100,000 is just the appetizer, Rachel. Your old man is sitting on an empire worth hundreds of millions. I am going to bleed him completely dry, and you are going to help me do it. Because if you do not, you know exactly what happens. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He tapped the screen a few times and shoved it directly into her face. I could not see the screen on the camera, but I did not need to. The sheer panic in my daughter's eyes told me everything. "Those files are completely fake," Rachel sobbed, her voice breaking. "I never prescribed those dosages. I never altered those patient charts. You hacked into the hospital server. You created those records. Any decent medical board will see that it is a forgery." "Will they?" Damien taunted, stepping even closer. "My people are the best in the world, Rachel. Those digital signatures match yours perfectly. The timestamps align with your exact shifts in the pediatric intensive care unit. 2 infants almost died, and according to the hospital mainframe, you are the one who deliberately tampered with their medication to cover up a surgical mistake. It is a masterpiece of digital framing." I sat in the dark, barely breathing. This was the invisible gun. Damien had not just threatened her life. He had threatened the one thing she valued more than anything else: her medical license, her ability to save children. He had engineered a scenario where she would not just lose her career, but she would be convicted of federal medical malpractice and attempted murder. She would spend the rest of her life in a federal penitentiary, universally hated as a monster who harmed sick babies. "If I press this button," Damien whispered, leaning in so close his lips brushed her ear, "these files are instantly emailed to the chief of medicine, the state medical board, and the local field office of the FBI. You will be arrested before you can even put on your scrubs tomorrow morning. Your father will die of a broken heart watching his precious daughter hauled away in handcuffs on the evening news. So wipe your face, stop crying, and get ready. Tomorrow, we are going to convince him to make me a managing partner in his company." He stepped back, leaving her sobbing quietly against the counter, and walked upstairs. In my basement, a blinding white-hot rage completely consumed me. I did not think. I just reacted. I stood up, knocking the heavy crystal glass off my desk. It shattered into 100 pieces on the concrete floor. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out my registered revolver. I checked the chamber, my hands shaking with absolute murderous intent. I was going to drive to her house. I was going to walk through the front door and put a bullet directly between his eyes. I did not care about the consequences. I did not care if I went to prison for the rest of my life. Nobody does that to my child. I was halfway up the basement stairs when a heavy hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. It was Victor Thorne. He had let himself into my house using the spare key I gave him. "Put the gun down," Harrison, Victor commanded softly, stepping down to block my path. "Move out of my way, Victor. I am going to kill him." "If you kill him, you kill her," Victor said, his voice an absolute wall of cold logic. "Listen to me very carefully. Men like Damien Russo do not operate on manual triggers. That hospital file is not just sitting on his phone, it is on a dead man's switch. If he does not log into his encrypted server every 12 hours, the system automatically publishes the files to the press and the authorities. If he goes missing, or if you blow his brains out tonight, those files go public tomorrow morning. Your daughter's life is over." I stopped. The heavy revolver suddenly felt like a block of lead in my continued gently. "You cannot win this by continued gently. You cannot win this by cutting off one head. You have to burn the entire network to the ground. You have to dismantle his dead man's switch, secure the original hospital servers, and trap him in a corner where he has absolutely no leverage left." I slowly lowered the weapon. The raw, violent rage inside me did not fade, but it crystallized. It hardened into a cold, strategic fury. I walked back down the stairs and locked the gun back in the drawer. "What is the next move?" I asked, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Victor walked over to the monitors, watching Damien sleep soundly upstairs, while my daughter sat awake in the dark kitchen. "We give him exactly what he wants," Victor said. "We invite him into your company. We let him think he has conquered the old man. I stared at the screen, watching the man who had turned my daughter's life into a living nightmare. He wanted Caldwell Logistics. I was going to give it to him, and then I was going to bury him underneath it. The next morning, the sun rose over the Boston skyline, casting a cold gray light through the windows of my home. I did not go into the office. Instead, I sat in my quiet study, surrounded by dark mahogany bookshelves and decades of corporate awards, and stared at the telephone. I needed to shift the battlefield immediately. I needed to bring the enemy out of the shadows and directly into the blinding light of my world. I picked up the heavy receiver and dialed the number Preston had given me. When he answered the call, his voice had that manufactured, cheerful tone he always reserved for the public. I did not match his energy. Instead, I let my voice waver deliberately. I cleared my throat several times, making myself sound frail, exhausted, and remarkably old. I told him I had not slept well at all. I told him the stress of planning the wedding and managing the company was finally catching up to my aging heart. I asked him if he could come to my estate this afternoon alone for a private conversation. He agreed instantly, without asking any questions. I could practically hear the arrogant smirk on his face through the receiver. He thought I was breaking down entirely. He thought the heavy stress of his financial demands was cracking my foundation. At 3:00 sharp, a sleek black town car pulled through the wrought iron gates of my massive property. I watched closely from the second-floor window as Preston stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting his tailored suit. His dark eyes scanned the sprawling manicured lawns and the classic stone architecture of the mansion. He was openly assessing the total value of my home, tallying up the square footage and the luxury vehicles parked in the circular driveway. He was looking at my life work as if it were already his personal inheritance. I walked downstairs incredibly slowly. I deliberately left my wooden cane by the front door, choosing instead to lean heavily against the grand staircase banister as I descended the steps. When I finally reached the foyer, I made sure my breathing sounded slightly labored. Preston stood in the center of the marble floor, looking entirely too comfortable in my house. "Thank you for coming on such short notice, Preston," I said, making sure my voice was barely above a raspy whisper. I gestured weakly toward the heavy double doors of my private study. "Please come in and sit down." I walked to the bar cart and poured us 2 glasses of aged scotch, making sure my hand trembled just enough to spill a few drops of the expensive amber liquid onto the silver serving tray. I handed him his heavy crystal glass and sank deeply into my favorite leather armchair, letting out a long, heavy sigh that echoed in the quiet room. I looked at him with the tired eyes of a completely defeated man. "You know, Preston, I have spent 40 years building Caldwell Logistics from the ground up. It is a $50 million machine today. It employs hundreds of hardworking people across the eastern seaboard. But sitting here today, I realize that none of it matters if I do not have a strong legacy to leave behind when I am gone. Rachel is a brilliant surgeon, and I am proud of her, but she has absolutely no interest in corporate freight contracts or union negotiations. She belongs in an operating room, not a demanding corporate boardroom." Preston leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked intensely onto mine. The sudden mention of a $50 million company had hit him like a physical blow to the chest. The $1.5 million he had previously demanded for the wedding was suddenly just pocket change compared to this new revelation. He was staring directly at the mother lode of wealth. "It is a very heavy burden for one man to carry alone, Harrison," he said smoothly, playing the role of the sympathetic and caring confidant perfectly. "You should be enjoying your twilight years in peace, not worrying about complex supply chain logistics and endless board meetings." "That is exactly why I asked you to come here today," I replied, letting my shoulders slump even further. I needed him to feel an overwhelming sense of superiority. I needed him to look at me and see nothing but a stepping stone to his ultimate payday. "I am so tired, Preston. My doctors are constantly warning me about my rising blood pressure. I feel my advancing age in every single bone of my body lately. I desperately need someone I can fully trust. I need someone young, aggressive, and highly financially literate to step in and take the heavy reins of the business. I looked at him, letting a desperate, pleading expression cross my wrinkled face. I want you to join the board of directors at Caldwell Logistics right away. I want to make you a managing partner in the firm. The silence in the grand study was absolute and heavy. Preston simply stared at me, his criminal mind racing at top speed. I could literally see the greedy calculations happening right behind his dark, calculating eyes. He was carefully weighing the risk of abandoning his immediate extortion plot against the massive long-term reward of infiltrating a legitimate corporate empire. His massive ego was his absolute greatest weakness. He truly believed he was the smartest person in any room he walked into. He believed his fabricated identity was entirely flawless, and that his practiced charm had completely hypnotized me into submission. Why settle for a quick $1 million when the foolish old man is practically handing over the keys to the entire corporate kingdom without a fight? "That is a very generous and unexpected offer, Harrison," he finally said, working incredibly hard to keep the intense, raw excitement out of his smooth voice. "But what about the lifestyle fund we discussed for Rachel?" I waved my trembling hand in the air dismissively. "We will handle the wedding fund in due time, of course. But right now I need to urgently secure the future of this entire family. I need a capable son to take over my life work before my health fails completely. I need you to come into the executive office on Monday morning and begin the corporate transition. I will give you full access to our financial infrastructure and accounting systems. You can modernize the legacy just like you brilliantly suggested at lunch yesterday." Preston absorbed every single word like a sponge soaking up water. His posture relaxed even further, his guard dropping completely as he reveled in my fabricated misery. He offered me hollow words of comfort, assuring me that my legacy would be preserved and expanded under his careful guidance. He promised to protect Rachel and the company with equal devotion, spinning a web of lies so thick and elaborate that an ordinary person would have been easily caught in it. But I was not an ordinary person. I was a predator who had just lured a parasite into a carefully constructed trap. Preston took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. The practiced mask of the sophisticated hedge fund manager was securely back in place, but I could easily see the raw, unchecked ambition burning fiercely in his gaze. He really thought he had just successfully pulled off the greatest con of his entire miserable life. He thought he had effortlessly broken a titan of industry without even breaking a sweat. "It would be an absolute honor to help you manage the company, Harrison," he said, raising his glass slightly in a mock tribute. "I promise I will not let you down." We stood up and shook hands. His grip was firm, strong, and overly confident. Mine was intentionally weak, clammy, and fragile. I walked him back to the front door, playing the pathetic, grateful, senile father-in-law right to the very end of the performance. I watched his black town car pull away and drive slowly down the long driveway, eventually disappearing into the afternoon shadows. As soon as the car was completely out of sight, my trembling completely stopped. I stood up perfectly straight, my posture returning to normal. I walked back into my study, poured the rest of my scotch back into the crystal decanter, and picked up the secure phone to call Victor Thorne. The bait was successfully taken. The massive distraction was perfectly executed. Preston Harrington was no longer just a faceless ghost hiding safely behind a fake investment portfolio. He was willingly walking right through the front doors of my corporate headquarters. The greedy fox was finally inside the henhouse, and he had absolutely no idea that I had just locked the door from the outside. Monday arrived with a cold wind sweeping off the harbor. I stood by the windows of my office watching the shipping yard below. For 4 decades, this view had been my pride. Today, it felt like I was looking at a besieged fortress. At 9 in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the executive suite slid open. Preston did not arrive alone. He walked in with the unearned swagger of a conquering general, flanked by 3 men wearing sharp, dark suits. They were supposedly his financial consultants, But you did not need a background in law enforcement to see what they really were. They had the thick necks, cold, dead eyes, and rigid posture of cartel enforcers. They did not carry briefcases. They carried encrypted laptops in reinforced titanium cases. I shuffled out of my office to greet them, leaning heavily on my wooden cane. I forced my hands to shake as I reached out to shake Preston's hand. "Morning, Harrison," Preston announced loudly, making sure every employee in the open plan bullpen heard him. "I brought my top transition team to help modernize the firm. We are going to streamline your entire operation by the end of the week." I offered him a weak smile. "Thank you, Preston. I am so glad you are here. My head is already spinning from all the paperwork. Please make yourselves completely at home." I gave them unrestricted access to the primary conference room, a space normally reserved for my most trusted board members. Within an hour, they had completely taken over. They pushed my senior analysts out of their chairs, plugged their black devices directly into our mainframe ports, and began aggressively bypassing our standard security protocols. I sat in my office with the door deliberately left wide open, watching the systemic invasion of my life's work. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to march out there and break my cane over Preston's smug face. The disrespect was palpable and immediate. These criminals treated my loyal employees like absolute garbage. I watched one of Preston's men, a massive thug with a scarred jaw, snap his fingers at a junior clerk demanding black coffee while downloading 10 years of highly confidential maritime freight contracts. Preston himself strolled through the aisles of cubicles loudly criticizing our legacy accounting software and making condescending remarks about our profit margins. He walked into my office just before noon, casually dropping a thick stack of printed authorizations on my mahogany desk. He did not even ask for permission to enter. He just threw himself onto my leather sofa, resting his expensive Italian shoes on my antique glass coffee table. "Just a few routine access waivers, Harrison," he said smoothly, examining his fingernails. "My team needs direct administrative clearance to bypass the domestic banking delays. We are setting up the new offshore routing infrastructure today. I need your signature on all 3 copies." I looked at the documents. They were sweeping authorizations that would grant his digital team the ability to unilaterally execute massive international wire transfers without any secondary executive approval. It was the financial equivalent of handing a loaded machine gun to a bank robber. I picked up my pen. My hand hovered over the paper, trembling perfectly on cue. "Are you absolutely sure this is safe, Preston?" I asked, letting my voice crack with manufactured anxiety. "I have never used offshore routing before." Preston let out a patronizing sigh and rolled his eyes. "Harrison, we discussed this yesterday. The modern financial world moves at the speed of light. If you want to protect Rachel's inheritance from corporate taxation, you have to let me do my job. Do you trust me or not?" I looked at him, summoning the image of my terrified daughter pressed against her kitchen counter. "I trust you completely, my boy," I whispered. I signed the papers. I handed the keys to my kingdom directly to a monster. By 3 in the afternoon, the syndicate was moving incredibly fast. They thought they had bypassed all of our internal monitoring. They did not know that Victor Thorne had spent the entire weekend installing a shadow network directly beneath our main server architecture. Every keystroke they made, every fake shell company they registered, and every single digital dollar they prepared to steal was being silently mirrored and recorded. But I was not the only one paying close attention to the strange digital anomalies echoing through the company mainframe. Down on the 4th floor in the heart of the corporate accounting department sat Sarah. Sarah had been with Caldwell Logistics for 28 years. She was a fiercely loyal, incredibly sharp woman who knew the financial lifeblood of this company better than anyone else alive. She had started as a payroll clerk and fought her way up to senior auditor. Nobody moved a single dime in this building without Sarah verifying the ledger. While the rest of the staff was intimidated by Preston's aggressive consultants, Sarah was simply annoyed. She was sitting at her desk, reviewing the daily reconciliation reports, when she noticed the glaring discrepancies. 3 new payment gateways had been authorized and embedded into our primary vendor accounts. Even worse, she saw an automated script actively draining incremental amounts from our maritime escrow, funneling cash into an unregistered encrypted digital wallet. Sarah did not panic. She ran a trace protocol. She printed out the raw transaction logs, her eyes narrowing as she studied the obvious signs of structural embezzlement. She knew exactly what this was. Someone was actively building a massive pipeline to bleed the company dry. She gathered the papers, placed them in a secure red folder, and slowly stood up. She bypassed her immediate supervisor. She did not trust the strange new men lurking in the executive suite. She trusted only one single man. She marched toward the elevator, determined to bring this evidence directly to my office, unaware she was walking straight into a dangerous war. Sarah stepped from her cubicle, clutching the red folder against her chest. She pressed the elevator button, watching the numbers descend. When the metal doors slid open, she stepped inside, prepared to march into my office and expose the financial anomalies. She pressed the button for the top floor. The doors began to close, but a large hand blocked the sensor. It was the massive thug with the scarred jaw, one of Preston's financial consultants. He did not say a word. He stepped inside, towering over Sarah, and pressed his security key against the panel. He hit the button for the underground parking garage. Sarah felt an icy chill down her spine. "Excuse me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to see Mr. Caldwell." The man did not look at her. He stared blankly at the metal doors as the elevator began a rapid descent. The doors opened into the dim concrete expanse of the subterranean parking garage. The air smelled of motor oil and damp cement. "Step out." The man grunted, blocking her from pressing any buttons. Sarah hesitated, her heart hammering, but had no choice. She walked into the echoing garage. The thug remained in the elevator, letting the doors slide shut, plunging her into gloom. She scanned the rows of parked cars. Footsteps echoed from a dark corner near the structural pillars. Preston emerged from the shadows, tossing a set of keys. His predatory smile fit perfectly with the terrifying atmosphere. "Hello, Sarah," Preston said smoothly, closing the distance. "I noticed you were running an intensive trace protocol on the new payment gateways. You are a thorough accountant. I respect that dedication." Sarah tightened her grip on the red folder, refusing to show fear. "I am doing my job," she replied firmly. "And my job is to report unauthorized escrow drains directly to the owner of this company." Preston stopped a few feet away. He let out a patronizing laugh. "The owner of this company is a confused old man who can barely remember breakfast. I am the future of Caldwell Logistics. And the future requires operational flexibility that legacy employees might find confusing." He took a step forward, his voice dropping into a vicious whisper. "I know everything about you, Sarah. You have a daughter named Emily, who just started her freshman year at Boston University. She walks back to her dormitory alone every Tuesday night after chemistry lab. It would be a tragedy if something happened to her, just because her mother decided to stick her nose where it does not belong." Sarah stopped breathing. The blood drained from her face. The red folder slipped from her numb fingers and hit the concrete floor with a thud. Preston smiled, a cold expression, promising absolute violence. He picked up the folder and brushed the dust off. "You are going back upstairs, Sarah. You will delete those trace logs. You will mind your own business. If you breathe a single word of this to Harrison, or run another audit on my accounts, my men will visit your daughter. Do we understand each other?" Sarah could only nod, tears of terror welling in her eyes. "Good," Preston whispered. "Now get back to work." Upstairs, I sat frozen behind my mahogany desk, watching the horrifying confrontation unfold live on the concealed security monitors Victor Thorne had integrated into my network. My hands were balled into tight fists, fingernails biting into my palms. The overwhelming rage I felt watching this monster threaten the family of a woman who had served me loyally for 3 decades was indescribable. I wanted to take the private elevator down to the garage and beat Preston within an inch of his miserable life. But I knew if I acted on that impulse, the entire operation would collapse. He would trigger the dead man switch and destroy Rachel completely. I had to swallow the bitter poison of inaction, but I refused to leave Sarah in the line of fire. I grabbed my secure phone and dialed Victor immediately. "I need an extraction right now," I ordered, keeping my voice low. "Preston just threatened my senior accountant in the basement. He used her daughter as leverage. I cannot let her go back to her desk terrified, but I cannot let Preston know I intervened." Victor did not waste time asking questions. "I will handle it, Harrison. Give me 20 minutes. I watched the monitors as Sarah stumbled back into the elevator looking shattered. I felt profound guilt, but I knew I was about to make it right. Exactly 20 minutes later, Sarah received an urgent, highly classified email from the corporate legal department. It was a fabricated mandate authorizing an immediate, fully paid emergency corporate retreat. The message stated she had been selected for an elite forensic accounting seminar at a secure luxury resort in Aspen. It was strictly confidential. Before she could process the sudden directive, 2 of Victor's undercover operatives dressed in corporate security uniforms arrived at her desk. They gently escorted her out of the building, explaining that a private car was waiting to take her to the airport. They assured her that her family was being quietly protected by a private security detail. Within the hour, Sarah was safely on a private jet, completely removed from the blast radius of the impending war. Meanwhile, Preston strolled back into the executive suite, practically glowing with arrogance. He walked right past my open door, assuming he had successfully crushed the internal resistance. He thought he had effectively terrorized the staff into total submission. I watched him settle back into the conference room, laughing loudly with his cartel enforcers. He believed the company was entirely his to command. He believed there were no obstacles left. His confidence had reached a blinding, dangerous peak. He was now fully prepared to push for his ultimate goal. He needed absolute signing authority to liquidate the primary corporate accounts, and he was coming for my signature. Less than an hour after he had threatened Sarah in the cold parking garage. Preston strolled confidently into my office. He did not bother to knock. He carried a thick leather binder under his arm and a gold-plated fountain pen in his right hand. He walked directly over to my desk and dropped the heavy binder right in front of me with a dull thud. He smiled, and if I had not seen what he was truly capable of on those hidden basement cameras, I might have actually believed the warmth in his eyes. "I have some fantastic news for you, Harrison," he said, pulling up a leather chair and leaning in close like we were old friends, sharing a wonderful secret. "I spent the entire morning reviewing the corporate trust architecture with my financial consultants. To be completely honest with you, your current tax burden is absolutely catastrophic. You are bleeding capital that should rightfully belong to your legacy and to Rachel. But do not worry, I have mapped out a comprehensive restructuring plan today. I just need your signature on these transfer documents, and we can start optimizing the corporate accounts by tomorrow morning." He flipped the binder open, revealing dozens of pages of dense legal jargon, complex financial clauses, and signature lines tagged with bright yellow sticky notes. It was a masterclass in aggressive corporate maneuvering. The plausible lie he presented was tax optimization and wealth preservation. But as I let my eyes scan the meticulously drafted paragraphs, the horrifying reality of what he was actually trying to do became crystal clear. These were not standard tax optimization forms. These were binding legal directives designed to systematically strip me of all executive power. If executed as written, these documents would completely bypass the board of directors, reassign the primary corporate voting rights directly to his newly established proxy accounts, and legally name Preston Harrington as the sole primary beneficiary of Caldwell Logistics. He was not just stealing the company. He was legally erasing my entire existence from the empire I had built with my own 2 hands. I looked up at him, letting my jaw drop slightly, perfectly, mimicking the look of a confused, overwhelmed elderly man trying to understand a complex problem. This looks like an awful lot of paperwork, Preston, I mumbled, rubbing my eyes wearily. Are you absolutely certain this is necessary right now? My head is throbbing and I can barely read the small print. Can we not simply have Michael Rosenthal look these over tomorrow morning? Preston immediately stiffened. The mere mention of my seasoned wealth management lawyer sent a brief flash of genuine panic across his carefully composed face. He knew Michael would spot the hostile takeover in exactly 3 seconds. He reached across the desk and gently placed his hand over mine, his grip just a fraction too tight. Harrison, we really do not have time to involve outside counsel, he said, his voice dropping into a soothing, hypnotic rhythm. The international markets are shifting rapidly. Every single day we delay this restructuring, the federal government is eating into Rachel's future inheritance. You trusted me to bring this company into the modern era. You asked me to protect your family. I am trying to do exactly that. But I cannot do it if you second-guess my financial expertise. You do not need to read the fine print, Dad. You just need to trust me. He pushed the gold-plated fountain pen into my hand. It felt heavy and cold. I looked down at the documents, then back up at his eager, hungry eyes. He was holding his breath, waiting for the final domino to fall. I let out a long, defeated sigh. You are right, Preston, I whispered softly. I am just so incredibly tired. I want to rest. I want to make sure my little girl is taken care of. I pressed the pen to the heavy paper. I forced my hand to tremble violently. The ink skipped across the signature line, creating a frail, jagged version of my name. I turned the pages, slowly signing document after document, playing the pathetic victim to absolute perfection. With every stroke of the pen, I could practically feel the radiating heat of his massive, unchecked greed. When I finally signed the last page, Preston snatched the heavy binder off the desk so fast he nearly knocked over my coffee cup. The look of pure, unadulterated triumph on his face was absolutely sickening. He had done it. He believed he had just legally stolen a $50 million empire without firing a single shot. He thanked me profusely, patted me condescendingly on the shoulder, and practically sprinted out of my office to show his cartel enforcers the ultimate prize. I sat alone in my office, watching the heavy door click shut. The fragile, confused old man persona instantly vanished. I leaned back in my leather chair, picked up my secure phone, and dialed Michael Rosenthal. It is done, I said quietly. He took the bait completely. Michael let out a low chuckle on the other end of the secure line. I bet he thinks he just pulled off the heist of the century, Harrison. He has absolutely no idea, I replied. Preston thought he had brought his own hostile takeover documents into my office. He thought his hackers printed the contracts from encrypted servers. But he severely underestimated us. Before Preston arrived, Michael and Victor secretly intercepted the print queue. They swapped his documents with a visually identical stack drafted by Michael. I had not signed over Caldwell Logistics. The company remained perfectly safe, locked behind hidden legal trusts. Instead, the papers I signed were binding registrations for 15 new shell companies. Michael specifically structured these to legally designate Preston as the sole owner. He just claimed ownership of a monitored financial trap. Within minutes, Preston began routing illicit cartel money into accounts he now legally owned, digging his grave. For the next 48 hours, the executive suite of Caldwell Logistics functioned as the command center for one of the most aggressive money laundering operations on the eastern seaboard. Preston Harrington and his team of cartel enforcers worked completely unchecked. They moved with a frantic, greedy energy. Believing they possessed absolute legal ownership of the newly registered shell companies, they began pumping massive volumes of illicit syndicate cash directly through my corporate infrastructure. Millions of dollars of dirty money from offshore extortion rackets flowed into the corporate accounts and was rapidly washed clean through the phantom LLCs. Preston walked the hallways with a smug, untouchable aura. He genuinely believed he had executed a flawless corporate coup. He thought the paper trail was buried under layers of impenetrable corporate secrecy. He was completely wrong. While Preston was busy celebrating his perceived genius, I quietly slipped out of the building. I told my receptionist I needed to visit my cardiologist for a routine stress test. I took a cab to the marina, making sure I was not being followed. I walked down the long wooden dock to a privately chartered luxury yacht, bobbing gently in the cold water. The boat did not belong to me. It was a secure, off-the-grid location, arranged specifically by Victor Thorne. I stepped inside the heavily tinted cabin. The interior had been completely stripped of its luxury furnishings and transformed into a high-tech surveillance bunker. Victor was waiting for me, standing next to a young man with dark circles under his eyes and a laptop resting on his knees. Harrison, Victor said quietly, as he locked the cabin door behind me. I want you to meet David. He is the best forensic cybersecurity architect on this side of the country. He used to build digital hunting algorithms for the National Security Agency. David did not offer to shake my hand. He simply turned his laptop screen toward me and tapped the glass with the end of his pen. Take a look at your new corporate partner in action, Mr. Caldwell, David said. His voice was flat and detached. The screen was a chaotic cascade of scrolling green numbers and flashing transaction alerts. It was completely incomprehensible to my old eyes. I do not understand what I am looking at, I admitted, pulling up a chair and staring at the rapid flow of data. David smiled faintly. You are looking at a Trojan horse, sir. When Michael Rosenthal drafted the registration documents for those 15 shell companies, he did not just legally isolate the accounts. I hardwired a mirroring protocol deep into the foundational code of those specific banking portals. Preston thinks he is operating on an encrypted localized network. He believes his proprietary software is hiding the origin of the cartel money. But because he used the specific LLC structures we handed him, every single digital action his team takes is automatically duplicated. David typed a rapid sequence of commands, and the screen shifted to a clean, highly organized geographical map of the world. Bright red lines began shooting across the digital globe, connecting Boston to the Cayman Islands, then to Eastern Europe, and back to the Caribbean. We are not just recording his local keystrokes, Harrison Victor explained, stepping up behind my chair. Every single illegal wire transfer, every hidden IP address belonging to his hacker network, and the routing numbers for the syndicate master offshore bank accounts are being actively harvested. And we are not keeping this data to ourselves. This entire stream is currently being live broadcast directly to a secure server at the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. I stared at the screen, the immense scale of the trap finally sinking in. Preston was not just digging his own grave. He was systematically mapping out the entire global financial nervous system of his criminal syndicate and handing it directly to federal agents on a silver platter. The FBI does not need to build a circumstantial case, Victor continued, his voice laced with cold satisfaction. Preston is voluntarily providing them with real-time, irrefutable forensic evidence of international money laundering and wire fraud. The feds are letting the trap run to gather as many syndicate targets as possible before they drop the hammer. When they finally move, it will be the largest coordinated raid in a decade. Preston is looking at a minimum of 40 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. A profound and deep sense of vindication washed over me. The monster who had terrorized my daughter and insulted my life work was currently signing his own death warrant. The legal cage being built around him was absolute and inescapable. I thanked David for his brilliant work and shook Victor's hand. I left the yacht feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The war was already won, and the enemy did not even know the battle had started. But as I took a taxi back toward my quiet suburban estate, the cold reality of the situation abruptly grounded me. Preston was doomed, but he was still a highly dangerous animal holding a loaded weapon pointed at my daughter's head. And worst of all, Rachel had absolutely no idea about the intricate trap I had constructed. To her, the nightmare was only getting darker. She thought I was a fragile old man, who had just surrendered our family legacy to a criminal. She thought she was completely alone, trapped in an impossible situation with no way out. As my taxi pulled into my driveway, my secure phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Victor calling back from the yacht. His voice was no longer calm. It was tight with genuine alarm. Harrison, Victor said urgently, "You need to look at the hidden camera feeds from Rachel's apartment right now. Something is very, very wrong." I hurried into my house and ran down to the basement, unaware that my daughter's psychological endurance had finally shattered. I threw open the basement door and practically fell down the wooden stairs. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I rushed toward the glowing bank of surveillance monitors. I grabbed the edge of the heavy desk, my eyes desperately scanning the different camera feeds from Rachel's home. Preston was not there. He was still at the corporate office, probably celebrating his newly acquired shell companies with his cartel enforcers. Rachel was completely alone. She was sitting at the massive marble island in her kitchen, bathed in the cold, harsh light of the overhead fixtures. She was not wearing her hospital scrubs. She was wearing a simple white dress, the one she usually saved for special family occasions. My breath caught in my throat. Tears were streaming silently down her pale cheeks. She had a pen in her right hand and a heavy piece of custom stationery in front of her. She was writing furiously, pausing only to wipe the blinding tears from her swollen eyes. Next to the letter was a small, neatly packed overnight bag, and sitting right beside her trembling left hand was a massive translucent orange bottle of prescription medication. It was not a standard bottle. It was a bulk container from the hospital pharmacy. I did not need a medical degree to know exactly what those white pills were or what a massive dose would do to her system. Victor's voice echoed from the speakerphone resting on the desk. "Harrison. She went into the hospital pharmacy 2 hours ago and signed out a lethal dose of barbiturates. She thinks taking her own life is the only way to stop Damien from destroying you. She is trying to sever the leverage." I did not answer him. I dropped the phone. I turned and sprinted up the basement stairs faster than I had moved in 20 years. The frail, senile old man persona instantly evaporated, replaced entirely by the primal, desperate adrenaline of a father fighting for his child's life. I grabbed my car keys from the foyer table and ran out the front door. The cold evening air whipped across my face as I threw myself into the driver's seat of my heavy sedan. I slammed the engine into gear and tore out of the driveway, the tires screaming violently against the smooth asphalt. The drive to her upscale neighborhood usually took 25 minutes in normal traffic. I made it in 12. I ignored every single red light. I swerved around slow-moving trucks and blasted my horn at anyone who dared to block my path. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles ached. My mind was a terrifying whirlwind of dark, horrifying images. I kept picturing my beautiful, brilliant daughter collapsing on her cold kitchen floor, her heart slowly stopping because she thought she had to protect an old man who was too weak to protect her. The heavy guilt was suffocating. I had been so intensely focused on building the perfect legal trap for Preston that I had completely failed to monitor the devastating psychological toll this nightmare was taking on Rachel. I had left her alone in the dark with a monster, and the profound isolation had finally broken her spirit. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a violent halt right in front of her manicured lawn. I did not even bother to turn off the engine or close the car door. I sprinted up the brick walkway. I bypassed the sophisticated electronic keypad, plunging my spare physical key directly into the heavy brass deadbolt. I twisted it violently, threw my shoulder against the solid wood, and burst into the silent house. "Rachel!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the quiet hallway. I ran straight toward the kitchen. The scene was exactly as I had witnessed on the surveillance monitors, but seeing it in person was 1,000 times more agonizing. She was standing by the sink now. The heavy orange pill bottle was open. She held a glass of water in her trembling left hand and a massive handful of small white pills in her right. Her tear-streaked face snapped toward me, her eyes wide with absolute shock and profound sorrow. "Dad," she sobbed, taking a desperate step backward. "What are you doing here? You should not be here. Go home, please." I crossed the large kitchen in 3 massive strides. I did not speak. I did not reason with her. I simply swung my arm and slapped her right hand with everything I had. The heavy glass of water shattered violently against the marble floor. The white pills exploded into the air, scattering like deadly hail across the pristine tiles, rolling harmlessly under the cabinets and the heavy refrigerator. Rachel let out a devastating, heartbroken wail. She collapsed against my chest, her legs giving out completely. I caught her wrapping my arms tightly around her trembling frame. We sank slowly to the kitchen floor together, surrounded by broken glass and scattered medication. She buried her face into my shoulder, her fingers gripping the fabric of my suit jacket, as if I were the only solid thing left in the entire world. "I am so sorry. Dad," she cried, her voice muffled against my chest. "I had to do it. He is going to take everything you built. He is going to ruin our family. He has files, terrible files that could send me to prison. If I am gone, he has no leverage left. He cannot hurt you anymore if I am not here. You have to let me fix this." I held her tighter, rocking her gently on the cold floor. I pressed my cheek against her head, letting my tears fall. The time for total deception was officially over. I wiped a tear from her cheek and looked into her eyes. "He did not win anything," I whispered. "He walked into a federal trap. I need your help." I kept my arms around her shoulders as I helped her up from the cold floor. I guided her to a wooden chair at the marble island and sat her down. I pulled up another chair, sitting close. I looked directly into her red eyes. "I know everything, Rachel," I said, keeping my voice calm to anchor her racing mind. "I know his real name is Damien Russo. I know he is a high-ranking operator in an international criminal syndicate. And most importantly, I know about the forged patient records he created by hacking into the hospital server." Rachel gasped loudly. Her hands flew to her mouth, and her eyes widened in absolute shock. But how she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "I never told you. He said if I even hinted at it, the files would instantly go to the medical board." "Because I did not wait for you to tell me," I explained softly. "The moment he demanded $1.5 million at the country club, I knew he was not just a greedy man. I knew he was a professional predator. And when you handed me that napkin, but continued playing the loving fiancé, I realized he was holding a gun to your head. I hired a private intelligence team. We bypassed the security in this house. We heard every threat he made to you in this kitchen. We saw the digital files." She looked at me, a mixture of profound relief and lingering terror washing over her pale face. "Dad, if you know what he has, then you know we cannot stop him. He has a dead man switch on a remote server. If we call the police, my life is completely over." I reached out and held her trembling hands in mine. Hands that saved children, hands that should never have been driven to holding lethal pills. "We are not calling the police, Rachel. The police are already watching him, and he has absolutely no idea." I explained the entire trap to her. I told her how I played the pathetic, senile old man. I detailed how I invited him into Caldwell Logistics and tricked him into signing ownership documents for 15 shell companies. I told her about the digital Trojan horse my security expert hardwired into the banking portals. Right now, as we sit here, Preston thinks he is laundering millions of dollars for a cartel. I said, a grim satisfaction lacing my words. What he does not realize is that every single digital keystroke, every illegal wire transfer, and every hidden offshore routing number is being broadcast live to the federal government. He is building his own inescapable prison cell. Rachel listened in absolute silence. The frantic, shallow breathing that had consumed her just moments ago slowly began to deepen and steady. "But what about the medical files?" she asked, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper. When the federal agents raid the engagement party, they will simultaneously seize his physical servers and wipe the dead man switch, I promised her. My team has already located the digital origin point. You will be completely cleared. But for this entire operation to work flawlessly, I need you to do the hardest thing you have ever done in your life. I squeezed her hands. I need you to go back to being the perfect, obedient fiancé. I need you to smile at him. I need you to let him think he still holds all the power. If his massive ego remains fed, he will not check his blind spots. Can you do that for me, Rachel? Can you hold on for just 48 more hours? I watched a remarkable transformation happen right in front of my eyes. The terrified, broken girl, who had been ready to end her own life just 20 minutes ago, slowly vanished. The profound exhaustion in her posture disappeared, replaced by the rigid, unbreakable spine of a woman who had survived grueling medical residencies and 30-hour surgical shifts. She inherited her mother's deep compassion, but in that moment, I saw my own ruthless determination staring back at me. She was a Caldwell. We built empires from nothing. We did not surrender to cheap street hustlers. Rachel slowly pulled her hands out of my grasp. She stood up, walked over to the kitchen counter, and grabbed a broom. She calmly began sweeping up the scattered white pills and the shattered glass. She dumped the lethal mess into the garbage bin, tying the bag in a tight knot. She walked back over to me and leaned down, kissing me gently on the cheek. "I can do it, Dad," she whispered. Her voice contained no fear anymore. It was sharp, cold, and burning with a quiet, lethal resolve. He wants to play a game with our family. Let us show him exactly how we play. I stayed with her until the early hours of the morning, making sure she was completely stable before I drove back to my estate. Over the next 2 days, Rachel delivered an absolute masterclass in psychological acting. She pampered Preston. She finalized the lavish details for the engagement party at the Four Seasons Hotel. She acted so deeply under his total control that Preston became completely drunk on his own perceived power. By Thursday afternoon, the syndicate money laundering through my corporate servers had reached its absolute peak. The FBI had gathered enough irrefutable evidence to put Preston and his entire network away for multiple lifetimes. The trap was fully loaded. The heavy steel door was waiting to slam shut. But Preston's bottomless greed required one final victory lap. He walked into my office on Friday morning looking incredibly arrogant in a brand-new tailored suit paid for with stolen money. The lavish engagement party was tomorrow night, and he had finally come to collect the original prize. He demanded the final transfer of the $1.4 million wedding and lifestyle fund. He walked into my office and closed the heavy oak door behind him. He did not sit down. He stood in front of my desk, a smug monument to his own perceived brilliance. "We have accomplished a great deal this week, Harrison." He began, his voice dripping with false affection. "The corporate restructuring is moving flawlessly. But as you know, tomorrow night is the engagement party. It is a monumental evening for Rachel and me. It represents the merging of our lives, our families, and our futures. And to properly solidify that union, I need the remaining $1.4 million of the lifestyle fund transferred by tomorrow night." He pulled a sleek black smartphone from his pocket and placed it delicately on the center of my desk. He tapped the screen once, revealing a complex digital wallet address composed of random letters and numbers. "This is a secure, untraceable offshore cryptocurrency account," he explained smoothly. "I want the funds routed directly into this specific ledger." I looked up at him, forcing my hands to tremble slightly as I gripped the edges of my mahogany desk. "A crypto wallet?" I asked, my voice wavering with perfectly manufactured confusion. "Preston, I do not understand. We already established the legacy trust accounts earlier this week. Why do we need to move such a massive amount of liquid cash into an untraceable offshore account?" Preston leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the desk. He lowered his voice, dropping the sophisticated businessman act and letting the ruthless street hustler bleed through. "Because it is a symbolic gesture of absolute trust, Harrison. You trusted me with your company. Now you need to prove that you trust me with your daughter. I want you to initiate the transfer live right in the middle of the engagement party, surrounded by all of your wealthy friends and elite colleagues. I want them to witness the exact moment you hand the Caldwell legacy over to me. I swallowed hard, acting as if his words were physically crushing me. And if I cannot liquidate that much cash by tomorrow night, I whispered, what if the banks need more time to process the authorization? Preston smiled, but there was absolutely no warmth in his dark eyes. It was the smile of a predator circling a wounded animal. You will find a way to make it happen, Dad, he said coldly. Because if that exact sum of money is not resting safely in my digital wallet by exactly 9 o'clock, tomorrow night, a highly unfortunate automated process will begin. At 9:01, a secure server will blast Rachel's altered medical files to the Massachusetts Medical Board, the regional director of the FBI, and every major news outlet in New England. She will be arrested before the catering staff even brings out the wedding cake. He reached over and tapped the face of his expensive gold watch. 9 o'clock sharp, Harrison. Do not be late. It would be a terrible shame to ruin such a beautiful celebration with a federal indictment. I sat perfectly still, letting my shoulders slump forward in utter defeat. Inside my chest, my heart was hammering with a fierce, triumphant rhythm. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to stand up and applaud his spectacular arrogance. He thought he was holding a knife to my throat, completely blind to the fact that he was standing on a digital landmine I had buried for him. He was demanding a live public financial transfer into a cartel crypto wallet. He was practically begging me to provide the FBI with the final irrefutable piece of evidence they needed to secure a life sentence. But I could not let him see even a single fraction of that victory. Please, Preston, I begged, my voice cracking perfectly. Do not do this to her. She loves her career. It is all she has ever wanted since she was a little girl. You have the company now. You have the shell accounts. Is that not enough? Can you not just let her practice medicine in peace? Preston straightened his posture, looking down at me with absolute unfiltered disgust. His massive ego was completely saturated by my pathetic display of weakness. It is not about the money anymore, old man, he sneered. It is about control. I need to know that you understand exactly who is in charge of this family now. You will make the transfer, or I will break her. It is really that simple. He picked up his sleek black smartphone, slipped it back into his tailored jacket, and turned toward the door. Wait, I called out weakly, raising a trembling hand. He stopped with his hand resting on the brass doorknob, glancing over his shoulder with a look of supreme irritation. I will do it, I whispered, staring down at my desk to hide the cold fire burning fiercely in my eyes. I will authorize the digital transfer tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Just promise me you will delete those horrible files. Promise me you will never threaten my little girl again. Preston let out a low, triumphant chuckle. As long as you follow my instructions, Harrison. Rachel will be perfectly safe. I will see you at the Four Seasons tomorrow. Make sure you wear a nice tuxedo. We are going to take a lot of pictures. He opened the heavy door and walked out, leaving me entirely alone in the quiet office. The trap was completely set. The final piece of the puzzle had just been violently shoved into place by the enemy himself. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Victor Thorne to give him the final confirmation. The federal agents were on standby. Rachel was prepared for the hardest performance of her life, and I was ready to watch a monster destroy himself in front of the entire world. The magnificent stage was now finally set for the ultimate grand finale tonight. There was absolutely no turning back. Saturday evening arrived with a biting chill in the Boston air, but inside the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel, it was a world of blinding golden warmth. I stood near the entrance, adjusting the cuffs of my black tuxedo, taking in the sheer opulence of the massive room. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a soft, romantic glow over the immaculate floral arrangements. A live string quartet played a delicate classical melody in the corner, their music floating over the gentle hum of 200 elite guests. It was a gathering of the most powerful people in the city. Politicians, shipping magnates, and hospital board directors, all mingled together, holding crystal flutes filled with expensive vintage champagne. To anyone looking in from the outside, it was the absolute picture of high society perfection. But to me, it was a terrifying cage. Preston was entirely in his element. He wore a custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo. He worked the massive ballroom with the effortless grace of a seasoned politician. I watched him from my quiet table near the back, nursing a glass of sparkling water. He was shaking hands with my oldest business partners, charming wives of my board members, and laughing loudly at jokes he probably did not even understand. He moved through the crowd with supreme arrogance, completely convinced that he was the smartest man in the entire building. His cartel enforcers were there too, wearing rented tuxedos that barely concealed their muscular frames. They stood near the emergency exits and the catering doors, trying to blend in, but looking like wolves hiding among a flock of sheep. But it was Rachel who truly commanded my attention. My beautiful daughter wore a stunning emerald green gown that brought out the vibrant color of her eyes. She was a vision of elegance. Watching her play her part was the most heartbreaking and awe-inspiring thing I have ever witnessed. She stood by Preston's side, smiling radiantly, laughing at his jokes, and leaning into his shoulder with perfectly feigned affection. Every single person in that room believed she was a happy bride-to-be. Only I knew the profound psychological torment she was hiding behind that brilliant smile. Only I knew the immense strength it took for her to stand next to the man who had threatened to destroy her entire life and pretend that he was her savior. I wanted to run across the room, grab her hand, and pull her out, but I remained perfectly still. I had a part to play, too. I was playing the defeated, compliant father. I sat slumped in my chair, looking tired and overwhelmed by the grand festivities. Every few minutes, Preston would glance over at me from across the room. It was never a warm look. It was a cold, calculated check. He was making absolutely sure I was still in my place. He was making sure I had the digital tablet ready for the final transfer of the $1.4 million. Each time our eyes met, I gave him a submissive nod. He would smirk, turn back to his wealthy audience, and continue his grand performance. He thought he had me completely leashed. He had absolutely no idea that Victor Thorne and 24 federal agents were sitting in black vans in the underground parking garage, monitoring every single breath he took. The tension inside me was unbearable. Every minute that passed felt like an agonizing hour. I kept obsessively checking my heavy gold watch. 8:15, 8:30, 8:45. The hands of the clock were crawling toward the 9 o'clock deadline with a torturous slowness. I knew that at 9 o'clock, Preston was going to demand the live transfer. I knew that if anything went wrong, if the digital Trojan horse failed, or if the federal agents missed their cue, the dead man switch would activate. Rachel's fake medical files would be blasted to the world, and her life would be shattered. The stakes had never been higher. My palms were sweating. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs. Before we continue to the grand finale of this story, if you are listening to this right now, and you are ready to see this arrogant scammer finally go down, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you would have the patience to sit through a dinner with a monster, just to spring the perfect trap. The string quartet transitioned into a softer melody as the waitstaff began clearing the empty salad plates. The ballroom was filled with the clinking of silver forks against fine china and the low murmur of wealthy conversations. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing pulse. The digital tablet felt like a block of lead resting on my lap. The screen was already queued up to the secure banking portal, waiting for my final authorization. It was 8:55. 5 minutes left until the final act. I looked across the room one last time. Rachel caught my eye. Just for a fleeting second, The fake smile dropped. She gave me a tiny nod. She was ready. We were both finally ready. At 8:58, Preston broke away from a group of hospital directors. He walked toward the center of the ballroom, picking up a silver spoon and a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. The music slowly faded away. The low hum of conversation began to quiet down. Preston smiled, his dark eyes sweeping across the massive room, drinking in the absolute attention of 200 elite guests. He raised his hand. He tapped the silver spoon against the crystal glass. The clear ringing sound echoed through the silent ballroom. It was time for the speeches. It was time for his ultimate victory lap. And it was time for me to finally destroy him. The clear ringing sound of silver striking crystal commanded the immediate attention of every single guest in the grand ballroom. Conversations died down to a respectful hush as faces turned toward the center of the room. Preston stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the magnificent chandeliers, holding his champagne flute high. He waited until the silence was absolute, soaking in the undivided attention of the city's most influential people. He offered a warm, perfectly practiced smile that radiated false humility and manufactured charm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston began, his voice projecting smoothly across the vast space. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate this beautiful milestone. As I look out at all of your faces, I see the very foundation of this great city. I see visionaries, leaders, and titans of industry. But more importantly, I see family. Family is the core of everything we build and everything we leave behind. When I first met Rachel, I knew instantly that she was not just the love of my life. I knew she was the future I had always been searching for." He reached out and pulled Rachel to his side. She stepped forward gracefully, keeping that brilliant, agonizingly fake smile plastered across her beautiful face. She rested her head against his shoulder, playing the part of the devoted bride with a terrifying perfection. Preston kissed the top of her head, drawing a collective murmur of adoration from the wealthy guests. "But joining this family means more than just a wedding." Preston continued, his voice taking on a tone of deep reverence. "It means stepping into a legacy. For 40 years, Harrison Caldwell has been a pillar of the logistics industry. He built an empire with his own bare hands, navigating storms that would have crushed lesser men. He has been a mentor, a father figure, and an absolute inspiration to me. And over the past week, as we have worked closely to modernize the Caldwell portfolio, he has shown me a level of trust that I will spend the rest of my life trying to honor." He gestured dramatically toward my table in the back of the room. The spotlight shifted, illuminating my slumped posture and tired face. A polite round of applause rippled through the ballroom. I forced a weak, trembling smile, giving the crowd exactly what they expected to see. An aging lion stepping down from his throne. "Harrison, please come join us up here," Preston called out. I gripped my wooden cane and slowly pushed myself up from the chair. I made sure every step I took was slightly unsteady. I walked past tables of my oldest friends and fiercest corporate rivals. I could feel their sympathetic eyes on me. They thought they were watching a tired old man peacefully surrendering his life's work to a vibrant, capable successor. They had absolutely no idea they were witnessing a hostage situation. When I finally reached the center of the room, Preston draped a heavy arm around my shoulders. His grip was painfully tight, a physical reminder of the absolute control he thought he held over me. He turned back to the audience, his eyes shining with unchecked ambition. "Tonight is about passing the torch," Preston announced loudly. "We wanted to do something special, something unprecedented. In the modern financial world, legacy is preserved through bold action. Harrison and I decided that instead of a traditional blessing, we would solidify our union with a profound gesture of trust. Right here in front of all of our esteemed friends and family, Harrison is going to officially authorize the final transfer of the Caldwell Family Trust into our new joint portfolio." A murmur of genuine surprise washed over the crowd. It was an incredibly unorthodox move, airing private financial matters at a social gala. But Preston's delivery was so smooth, so confident, that the elite guests simply accepted it as a theatrical display of extreme wealth. Preston snapped his fingers. A waiter stepped forward immediately carrying a silver tray. Resting on the center of the polished metal was a sleek black iPad, its screen glowing brightly against the dim lighting of the ballroom. Preston picked up the device and held it out to me. The screen displayed the final confirmation page of the untraceable offshore crypto wallet. The amount was clearly listed: $1.4 million. All it required was a single tap on the bright green button labeled Send. I reached out with trembling hands and took the heavy tablet. My fingers hovered over the smooth glass. The entire room was completely silent, waiting for the historic corporate transaction to be finalized. Preston leaned in close, wrapping his arm even tighter around my fragile shoulders. He pressed his cheek against mine, posing for the flashes of the society photographers hired to document the evening. To the crowd, it looked like a touching embrace between a father and his new son. But as he smiled for the cameras, he whispered directly into my ear. His voice was no longer warm. It was a cold, venomous hiss. "Press send, old man, or your daughter goes to prison," he whispered maliciously. "You have 3 seconds before I signal my men to upload the files. Do it now." I stood there feeling the heat of the stage lights beating down on my face. I could smell the expensive cologne radiating off Preston's tailored suit. I could hear the shallow, terrified breathing of my daughter standing just 2 feet away. This was the moment Damien Russo had spent months meticulously planning. This was the absolute peak of his criminal career. He thought he had completely conquered the Caldwell family. I stopped trembling. The facade of the frail, defeated old man melted away in an instant. I straightened my spine, standing tall for the first time in weeks. I turned my head slowly and looked directly into his dark, greedy eyes. The arrogant smirk on his face faltered for a fraction of a second as he felt the sudden, terrifying shift in my posture. I did not say a single word to him. I simply looked away, casting my cold gaze over the 200 elite guests waiting in the silent ballroom. I looked at the string quartet, the catering staff, and the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. Then, with a perfectly steady hand, I pressed the bright green button, Send. The moment my finger tapped the smooth glass of the screen, the entire atmosphere in the grand ballroom shifted. Preston leaned back, a victorious exhale escaping his lips. He raised his champagne flute toward the ceiling, fully expecting the massive digital projector suspended above the stage to flash a bright green confirmation graphic of the offshore transfer. He expected the elite crowd to erupt into polite congratulatory applause. He expected to stand there as the undisputed king of the Caldwell Empire. Instead, the enormous white canvas dropped down from the ceiling with a heavy mechanical hum. The high-definition projector flared to life, casting a brilliant beam of light across the darkened room. But it did not show a bank logo. It did not show a romantic montage of engagement photos. It showed the stark black and white feed from the hidden camera located inside my daughter's kitchen. The high-fidelity audio system previously used to amplify the delicate string quartet suddenly blasted the harsh, grating sound of Preston's true voice. The crowd froze. Hundreds of crystal champagne flutes were lowered in absolute confusion. On the massive screen, a 20-foot-tall projection of Preston was violently backing Rachel against her marble kitchen counter. His face was twisted into a vicious, predatory sneer. The audio echoed off the vaulted ceilings, completely clear. "You hesitated when he wrote the check," the digital ghost of Preston hissed out into the silent ballroom. "If you ever look at him like a scared little rabbit again, I will not wait until the wedding. I will ruin you right now. Do you understand me?" A collective, horrified gasp ripped through the crowd. I watched the faces of my oldest friends. The hospital board members and the powerful politicians contort into profound shock. Women covered their mouths in shock. Men stiffened their eyes, darting between the horrifying footage on the screen and the man standing right next to me on the stage. Rachel immediately stepped away from Preston. She did not look like a frightened victim anymore. She stood tall, her shoulders pulled back, the emerald green fabric of her gown sweeping across the stage as she moved to my side. I reached out and wrapped my arm securely around her waist, pulling her close. We stood together, presenting a united, unbreakable front. Preston's champagne flute slipped from his fingers. It hit the polished wooden stage, shattering into dozens of sharp fragments, the expensive vintage wine splashing across his custom Italian leather shoes. His mouth opened and closed silently, his eyes wide with absolute panic as he stared at the massive screen overhead. Before the crowd could even process the violent threat they had just witnessed, the video feed cut abruptly. The screen transitioned to a series of highly detailed digital documents. It was the forged pediatric intensive care records, but Victor Thorne's cybersecurity expert had completely deconstructed the forgery. Bright red circles highlighted the mismatched timestamps. Bold digital text crawled across the bottom of the projection, clearly explaining how the hospital mainframe had been illegally accessed from an external, unregistered server located in Eastern Europe. The presentation displayed undeniable forensic proof that the catastrophic medical errors had been entirely fabricated by a team of mercenary hackers. The chief of medicine for Boston General Hospital was sitting at table 3. I watched him stand up slowly, his face flushed with absolute outrage as he realized one of his best pediatric surgeons had been the target of a malicious extortion plot. The presentation did not stop there. The screen shifted one final time. The medical files dissolved, replaced by a complex scrolling web of international banking data. It was the digital Trojan horse in all its glory. The massive projector displayed the exact routing numbers, the hidden offshore accounts, and the names of the 15 shell companies Preston had registered just days ago. A harsh robotic voice generated by the presentation software began reading the transaction logs aloud. It detailed millions of dollars of illicit cartel funds flowing directly into accounts legally owned by the man standing on the stage. The word fraud flashed in massive red letters, followed instantly by the phrase, international money laundering. The elite crowd began to murmur loudly. The polite silence of high society was completely shattered by a rising tide of angry voices. Preston was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored midnight blue tuxedo jacket. For 10 agonizing seconds, the charming, sophisticated hedge fund manager was completely gone. In his place stood Damien Rousseau, the desperate street hustler, who had just been caught in the glaring spotlight. He looked frantically toward the emergency exits at the back of the ballroom. I saw his cartel enforcers backing away into the shadows, realizing that the entire operation had been hopelessly compromised. They were abandoning him. He was completely alone on the stage, exposed to the wrath of the most powerful people in the city. I looked at him, feeling a deep, cold satisfaction settling into my bones. "You wanted a public display," I said softly, making sure only he could hear me over the rising chaos of the ballroom. "I hope you appreciate the presentation." But the profound panic in his eyes only lasted for a moment. His massive, blinding ego simply could not accept total defeat. He blinked rapidly, his jaw clenching, as his criminal mind scrambled for a lifeline. He looked at the screen, then back at me, his posture slowly straightening. He smoothed the lapels of his jacket, forcing his frantic breathing to slow down. The raw fear on his face was rapidly replaced by a cold, arrogant fury. He still believed he held the ultimate trump card. He still believed he had outsmarted me in the corporate boardroom. He thought the footage was just an elaborate smear campaign, a desperate attempt to embarrass him in public. He sneered at me, a cruel, mocking laugh escaping his throat as he grabbed the microphone from the nearby podium. He gripped the cold metal of the microphone stand, his knuckles turning stark white as he let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed awkwardly through the massive ballroom. It was a desperate, hollow sound, completely devoid of genuine amusement. He looked out at the sea of horrified faces, his eyes wide and frantic, trying to project an aura of absolute control. "Ladies and gentlemen, please calm down," Preston announced, his voice cracking slightly on the last word. What you are seeing up on that screen is nothing but a terrible, confused misunderstanding. It is a fabricated smear campaign created by a man whose mind is tragically deteriorating. He turned and pointed a stiff finger directly at my chest, his mask of sophisticated charm completely dissolving into raw malice. Harrison is suffering from severe dementia. He does not even know what day it is, let alone how to operate a digital projector. He is sick and he is lashing out because he is terrified of letting go of his precious company. The elite crowd did not murmur in agreement. They did not nod in sympathetic understanding. They simply stared at him in absolute silence, the overwhelming weight of the forensic evidence projected behind him, rendering his desperate lies completely useless. But Preston could not read the room. His massive ego blinded him to the reality of his own destruction. He took a step closer to me, aggressively invading my personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me one last time. He lowered the microphone, but his voice was still loud enough to carry across the tense, quiet stage. "You think a fake video and some altered bank records are going to save you?" he hissed, his face twisted in pure rage. "You think you can embarrass me in front of these people and just walk away? You are out of your mind, old man. I own you." He turned back to the audience, lifting the microphone to his lips again, his voice rising to a frantic shout. "You can project whatever fake documents you want up there, Harrison. It does not change the legal reality. I own Caldwell Logistics. I have the legally binding signed restructuring documents locked in a secure vault. I possess absolute signing authority pass over every single asset, warehouse, and maritime contract this family holds." He laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that bordered on sheer hysteria. "You gave it all to me. You signed the LLC transfers right in your own office. You cannot touch me. Nobody in this room can touch me. I am the sole primary beneficiary, and by tomorrow morning I will liquidate this entire pathetic empire and leave you with nothing." He stood there breathing heavily, chest puffed out, waiting for his grand declaration of victory to crush my spirit. He waited for me to crumble, to beg, or to collapse under the weight of his supposed legal checkmate. Instead, I calmly reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling hand. He was so stunned by my steady, deliberate movement that he simply let it go. I did not raise my voice. I did not shout. I did not need to. When you speak the absolute truth, you do not need to yell for people to hear you. "Preston," I said, my voice smooth, deep, and carrying the full, unyielding weight of a man who had spent 40 years commanding entire industries. "You are absolutely correct about one thing. I did sign a very thick stack of legal documents in my office on Friday afternoon, and you do in fact hold absolute legal ownership over the entities listed in those files." I paused, letting the heavy silence of the ballroom stretch out for a few agonizing seconds. I turned to look at him, my expression completely devoid of mercy. "But you do not own Caldwell Logistics. You never did. You never even came close." Preston blinked, his arrogant sneer faltering, as a flicker of genuine confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his voice suddenly weak. I stepped closer to him, ensuring every single guest in the room could hear the final nail being driven into his coffin. "When you confidently marched into my office with your hostile takeover paperwork, you severely underestimated the team I have protecting my legacy. My lawyer, Michael Rosenthal, intercepted your print queue before you even reached my door. We swapped your documents with our own. You did not sign yourself in as the managing partner of my $50 million supply chain empire. You signed legally binding registrations to become the sole owner and primary operator of 15 completely fabricated shell companies." The color rapidly drained from Preston's face. His mouth fell open, but no words came out. The horrific realization of what he had done over the past 48 hours was beginning to dawn on his criminal mind. "For the last 2 days, you and your cartel enforcers have been aggressively pumping millions of dollars of illicit syndicate cash directly into accounts that you legally own." I continued, my tone as cold and sharp as a winter blade. "You voluntarily built a massive money laundering operation under your own name and you executed every single transaction on a server that was actively broadcasting your digital footprint to the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. You built your own cage, Preston, and you locked the door from the inside. No, he whispered, taking a stumbling step backward. No, that is impossible. The crypto wallet, the 1.4 million. I just watched you authorize the transfer. I smiled a small, grim expression of ultimate victory. That is the best part of all, Preston. The cryptocurrency wallet you provided me was indeed untraceable. But the account I just transferred my money into was not yours. I overrode your destination code. The $1.4 million you demanded as a symbolic gesture of trust was just successfully wired directly into an undercover IRS sting account. You did not just extort an old man today. You actively solicited and received a massive wire transfer from a federal honeypot. The physical transformation of Preston Harrington was absolute and immediate. The sophisticated, arrogant hedge fund manager shattered into a million irreparable pieces. His knees buckled slightly, his hands shaking violently as he looked around the room. He was not looking at elite guests anymore. He was looking at witnesses to his massive federal crimes. He realized with a suffocating, crushing terror that he had never been the predator in this scenario. He had been the prey from the very beginning. He had walked blindly into an elaborate, inescapable trap designed by a mastermind he had foolishly mistaken for a weak, senile victim. The absolute destruction of his life was complete. The silence that followed my revelation was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. For a few agonizing seconds, no one in the grand ballroom moved or spoke. The elite guests, the waiters, the musicians, everyone simply stared at the broken man standing on the stage. Damien Rousseau, the phantom who had built his entire miserable existence on deception, was finally forced to look at his true reflection. His chest heaved. His hands shook. He took another step backward, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping slightly on the spilled champagne from his dropped glass. He looked toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the room, calculating his chances of escaping into the cold Boston night. He never even got the chance to try. The heavy double doors of the Four Seasons ballroom did not just open. They violently burst apart, the thick wood crashing against the walls with the force of a detonated bomb. The polite, refined atmosphere of the engagement party was instantly shattered by the deafening sound of heavy combat boots hitting the polished marble floor. Dozens of federal agents flooded into the room. They wore dark tactical gear with the bold yellow letters of the FBI and the IRS plastered across their armored vests. They moved with terrifying speed and absolute precision, a highly coordinated military strike dropping right into the middle of a high society gala. Victor Thorne led the charge. The former federal ghost had traded his faded gray trench coat for a tactical vest, his face a mask of cold, professional determination. "Nobody move!" Victor's voice boomed over the chaos, echoing through the massive space with absolute authority. "Federal agents, keep your hands where we can see them and step away from the center of the room." The wealthy guests shrieked and scattered. Women in expensive gowns grabbed their husbands, pulling them toward the edges of the ballroom. The catering staff dropped their silver trays, diving behind the buffet tables for cover. The perfectly arranged seating plan dissolved into pure panic as the federal strike team rapidly secured the perimeter. Preston finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The raw survival instinct of a career criminal completely took over. He spun around, his eyes frantically searching for an alternate exit. He saw a set of swinging doors leading toward the hotel kitchen on the left side of the stage. He bolted quickly. He shoved a terrified hospital board director out of his way, practically leaping off the edge of the polished wooden stage. But Victor Thorne had been hunting dangerous men for 2 decades. He anticipated the move before Preston even made it. Victor sprinted across the ballroom floor, cutting off the escape route with terrifying speed. Preston realized he was trapped. He changed direction, desperately weaving through the crowded tables, knocking over expensive floral arrangements and crystal water pitchers in a frantic bid for freedom. He was fast, but he was blinded by pure panic. He did not see the massive multi-tiered champagne tower positioned near the ice sculptures until it was far too late. Victor lunged forward, closing the final distance between them. He grabbed the collar of Preston's tailored midnight blue tuxedo jacket and drove his shoulder hard into the scammer's back. The impact was devastating. Preston was launched forward, crashing headfirst into the magnificent tower of crystal glasses. The sound of 1,000 expensive champagne flutes, shattering simultaneously, was deafening. Preston hit the floor hard, buried under a glittering avalanche of broken glass and sticky vintage wine. He groaned in pain, trying to push himself up on his bleeding hands, but Victor was already on top of him. The former federal agent planted a heavy tactical boot directly between Preston's shoulder blades, pinning him securely to the ruined floor. "Do not even think about moving, Damien," Victor growled, ripping the criminal's arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut over Preston's wrists sounded like absolute music to my ears. While Victor secured the head of the snake, the rest of the federal strike team was meticulously taking apart the body. Across the ballroom, the cartel enforcers who had posed as financial consultants tried to slip quietly toward the emergency exits. They were professionals, but they were completely outmatched. The FBI had already identified every single one of them from the security footage at Caldwell Logistics. Agents swarmed the exits, tackling the massive thugs to the floor before they could even reach for their concealed weapons. The elegant engagement party had become a massive crime scene. I stood perfectly still on the center of the stage, my arm wrapped tightly around Rachel. I watched the highly organized chaos unfold with a profound sense of deep settling peace. The nightmare was finally over. The men who had threatened my daughter, who had insulted my life's work, and who had tried to steal my family's legacy were now bleeding on the floor, their hands bound securely behind their backs. Preston was hauled to his feet by two massive federal agents. His beautiful custom suit was torn and soaked in wine. His face was bruised and bleeding from the shattered glass. He struggled against their grip, kicking wildly and screaming obscenities that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of absolute hatred and complete disbelief. "You set me up!" Preston screamed, spit flying from his lips as the agents dragged him toward the exit. "You ruined me! I will kill you, Harrison! I will take everything from you!" I did not flinch. I did not shrink away from his frantic threats. I let go of my wooden cane. It clattered loudly against the wooden stage floor, a useless prop that I no longer needed. I straightened my spine to its full commanding height. The tired, stooped posture of the weak, senile old man completely vanished in an instant, leaving only the aura of a ruthless titan standing completely victorious. The days following the raid at the Four Seasons were an absolute whirlwind of flashing cameras, federal depositions, and endless meetings with my legal team. The spectacular collapse of Damien Russo and his international romance scam syndicate completely dominated the national evening news cycles for several weeks. Every major newspaper on the eastern seaboard ran extensive front-page stories detailing how a supposed hedge fund genius had been meticulously dismantled by the very man he thought he was effortlessly manipulating. The sheer scale of the federal bust was unprecedented. The digital Trojan horse we had planted in the shell company infrastructure provided the FBI with everything they needed to tear the criminal network out by its deepest roots. They seized dozens of physical servers hidden in remote locations across Eastern Europe. They froze millions of dollars in illicit offshore cartel accounts. And most importantly, they secured an airtight federal indictment against the man who had dared to threaten my daughter. Preston Harrington was dead and buried, and Damien Russo was denied bail by a federal judge who looked at the mountain of forensic evidence with absolute disgust. He is currently sitting in a maximum security detention center, facing over 40 years in a federal penitentiary, without the slightest possibility of parole. His cartel enforcers turned on him immediately, in exchange for reduced sentences, completely sealing his fate. He will never wear a tailored suit again. He will never drink expensive vintage champagne. And he will never ever target another innocent family for as long as he lives. But the absolute greatest victory of this entire ordeal was not watching a monster get locked away behind cold steel bars. It was watching my beautiful daughter finally breathe again. The morning after the raid, Rachel and I sat down in a private conference room at the local FBI field office with Victor Thorne and the lead federal prosecutor. They presented us with the original physical hard drives seized from his hidden local servers. Right there in front of us, the cybersecurity experts permanently purged the fabricated pediatric intensive care files. The fake medical records that had hung over her head like a deadly guillotine were legally and completely destroyed. She was officially cleared of any fabricated wrongdoing, completely shielded by a federal mandate that protected her pristine medical license. The profound weight that had been crushing her spirit was finally lifted. I watched the color return to her cheeks. I watched the bright, passionate light return to her green eyes. A week later, Rachel walked back through the sliding glass doors of Boston General Hospital. She did not walk in with her head down. She walked in with her shoulders pulled back, radiating a fierce, quiet strength that absolutely commanded respect. The horrific ordeal she had survived did not break her. It forged her into something unbreakable. She returned to the pediatric ward not just as a brilliant surgeon, but as a woman who knew exactly how incredibly strong she truly was. With Rachel completely safe and thriving, I had one final crucial piece of unfinished business to attend to. I returned to the executive suite of Caldwell Logistics on a crisp Tuesday morning. The office was quiet, still recovering from the intense shock of the federal raid that had swept through the Bildzetting just days prior. The employees were nervous, uncertain of what the future held for the company now that the hostile consultants had been exposed as dangerous cartel enforcers. I walked straight to the corporate accounting department on the 4th floor. The desk belonging to my senior auditor, Sarah, was completely empty. I picked up my phone and called Victor, telling him it was finally time to bring her home. The following morning, Sarah walked hesitantly into my office. She looked rested from her forced corporate retreat in Aspen, but there was a deep lingering anxiety in her eyes. She thought she was walking into a disaster. She thought the terrible men who had threatened her daughter in the parking garage were still lurking in the shadows. I stood up from my heavy mahogany desk and walked over to her, taking her trembling hands in mine. I looked her directly in the eyes and told her the absolute truth. I told her that the men who had threatened her family were currently sitting in federal prison. I told her that I had witnessed her incredible bravery on the security cameras and that her fierce loyalty to this company had not gone unnoticed. I handed her a thick, sealed envelope. Inside was a cashier check for a massive financial bonus, enough to completely pay for the entire college tuition of her daughter at Boston University, with plenty left over for a comfortable retirement. Sarah broke down into tears of absolute joy, hugging me incredibly tightly. It was the best investment I had ever made in my 40 years of business. As I sat behind my desk and looked out at the shipping yards, I realized something profound. I did not want to be the king of this empire anymore. The grueling battle to protect my family had drained the final reserves of my corporate ambition. I built Caldwell Logistics from a single delivery truck into a titan of industry. It was a magnificent legacy, but it was finally time to let it go. I called an emergency meeting with the board of directors that afternoon. I stood at the head of the conference table and officially announced my retirement. I did not hand the company over to an arrogant outsider. I transferred the true reins of the business to the dedicated men and women who had bled for this company for decades. I signed the transition documents without any hesitation. My hands were completely steady. The heavy burden of leadership was finally lifted from my tired shoulders. I packed a small box, took one last look, and walked out the door. The transition was smooth. I was completely free. The transition was smooth. I was completely free. I drove back to my estate that afternoon, with the windows rolled down, letting the crisp autumn wind fill the cabin of my car. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there were no invisible threats looming over my shoulder. There were no digital traps to monitor, no federal agents to consult, and no elaborate performances to maintain. The heavy, suffocating clouds that had darkened my family's skies had finally broken, leaving behind a profound and absolute clarity. When I pulled into the circular driveway of my home, the massive stone mansion did not feel like a fortified bunker anymore. It felt like a home again, a sanctuary where my daughter and I could finally heal. The next morning, I woke up before the sun had even crested the horizon. I walked down to the kitchen, the hardwood floors cold beneath my feet, and brewed a strong pot of black coffee. I poured 2 steaming mugs and carried them out to the back porch. The air was biting, carrying the distinct scent of fallen pine needles and damp earth. I sat down in my favorite wooden rocking chair, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic mug, and simply watched the world wake up. The sprawling, manicured lawns stretched out toward the quiet tree line, bathed in the soft gray light of the early dawn. A few minutes later, the heavy glass door slid open, and Rachel walked out onto the porch. She was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, her hair pulled back into a messy knot. She did not say a word. She simply took the second mug from my hand, sat down in the chair next to mine, and pulled her knees up to her chest. We sat there, in complete silence for a very long time, listening to the gentle rustle of the wind moving through the tall oak trees. It was not the tense, terrifying silence we had endured in the weeks leading up to the raid. It was a comfortable, settling peace, the kind of peace that only comes after surviving a devastating war. Rachel took a slow sip of her coffee, the rising steam swirling around her face. She looked out at the horizon, a soft, genuine smile finally touching the corners of her lips. "It is incredibly quiet today," she whispered, her voice carrying a light, airy quality that I had not heard since she was a little girl. I took a sip of my own coffee, the bitter liquid warming my throat. "It is the best sound in the entire world," I replied. She rested her head against the high wooden back of her rocking chair and closed her eyes. "I have a long surgery scheduled for tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "A complex cardiac repair on a newborn. For the first time in months, my hands do not feel heavy. I do not feel that dark shadow standing right behind me in the operating room. I feel like myself again, Dad." I looked at her, my heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of pride. "You are stronger than you ever were, Rachel," I told her sincerely. "You walked through an absolute nightmare, and you did not let it break you. You saved yourself just as much as I did." She reached across the small space between our chairs and took my hand, giving it a firm, loving squeeze. "We saved each other," she corrected me. As I sat there holding my daughter's hand, I looked out over the sprawling estate that my decades of grueling labor had purchased, and I reflected deeply on what it actually means to build a legacy. When you spend your entire life forging an empire from the ground up, it is incredibly easy to lose sight of why you started building it in the first place. You become obsessed with profit margins, corporate acquisitions, and the sheer accumulation of wealth. You convince yourself that leaving behind a massive financial trust is the greatest gift you can possibly give your children. But sitting on that porch, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the morning, I realized how dangerously foolish that mindset truly is. Money can buy comfort. It can buy estates. But it cannot buy the fierce courage required to stand up to the monsters hiding in the dark corners of the world. My true legacy is not Caldwell logistics. My legacy is the brilliant, resilient woman sitting next to me. My legacy is the absolute certainty that if anyone ever tries to harm my blood, I will tear the heavens apart to protect her. A father's job does not end when his children grow up. The primal duty to protect your family is a lifelong vow. There are predators out there who look at an aging father and see nothing but a vulnerable target. They mistake white hair for a fading mind. They mistake polite patience for complete submission. They believe that because a man uses a wooden cane, he has forgotten how to wield a sword. Let my story serve as a permanent warning to anyone who thinks kindness equals weakness. If you try to extort a man who has spent his entire life building fortresses, do not be surprised when he locks you inside one and throws away the key. We may be old, we may be tired, but we are never defenseless. When you threaten the people we love, you awaken a sleeping giant that will not rest until your world is reduced to ashes. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helped you or gave you courage, please share it. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. Support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time. With love and respect.